So, good evening from Washington, D.C. This is, I believe, the 27th iteration of NESA's IOR digital series. We are pleased to be joined this evening by Darshana Baruah, who is at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. She's currently based in Japan. She's soon to be based in D.C., where she will be taking the reins of a new Carnegie project focused on the Indian Ocean. So it is fortuitous timing that she's joining us today. So, Darshana, thank you so much for carving out time amidst your busy schedule and an international move. I'll just jump into a huge, very easy to answer question, and it is this. The Indian Ocean region, or the IOR, as a lot of people like to abbreviate it, is a massive, complicated, developing region that historically, by non-regional states, has been viewed as simply a highway for natural resource wealth and global trade. But now that stereotype is completely antiquated, and the IOR has a lot of things going on. Given that you spend your career focused on this region, what are some of the trend lines that people who don't have a deep background on the IOR should be paying attention to based upon your assessment?
Thanks, Jeff. First, thank you so much for having me here. It's really good. It's always good to be talking about Indian Ocean issues. It's taken a while, I guess, to start having conversations. So thank you very much for the part that you are doing in taking the conversation forward. Um, that is a broad question, but I think there has been some key developments or changes in the Indian Ocean region, especially in the last 2 decades or so. And I think some of these have in fact been intensified or become more prominent or pronounced, I would say about 2012, 2013 onwards. One is the rise of maritime identities. That nations if they kind of associated geographically through continental subblocks, say subregions like say South Asia or the Middle East or Africa. Today you have countries take on more and more of, I'm an Indian Ocean country, I'm an Indian Ocean island, we are a maritime country, we have maritime goals and visions, and the ocean and the seas are very important to our existence, to our economy, to our basic livelihood as well as strategy. So you're seeing a change in this of maritime identities, both from bigger powers as well as smaller powers. So you have a country like India, which is again reorienting a lot of its foreign policy engagements through the maritime domain, where it sees itself collaborating with its partners on the maritime domain through maritime security issues, as well as smaller islands. You have Sri Lanka call itself Indian Ocean island. You have Comoros and Madagascar talking about developing a national security strategy, which is primarily maritime focused. So there is definitely this rise of a maritime identity from countries which have traditionally taken on a more continental approach, or countries which did not have the, I guess, avenue to talk about maritime security as much, because the rest of the world was focused more had a more continental view. So the Indo-Pacific definitely has helped shape that, provide that platform. But I think this change started happening before most nations adopted the concept of Indo-Pacific. I would say 2013 was Australia when it first talked about it in its white paper, but 2015-16 onwards. So the rise of maritime identities is something that I see as a new developing trend that will stay, and that would change the interactions. Because if you're talking about if they are identifying, or if their political identity is now an Indian Ocean country or a maritime country, then the geopolitical theater, the avenue for collaboration as well as competition changes, the geography changes. So this is something that would change how we interact and who's present in the Indian Ocean region. Second that I see is there is, of course, when we talk a lot about Indian Ocean and we talk about competition, naturally we talk a lot about China. That China is the natural kind of new power. What does China's presence in the Indian Ocean mean? How would it affect or challenge India's perceptions, India's own presence in the region, or US? How does it shape collaborations between bigger powers? How does it shape collaborations between smaller and bigger powers, right? But I think there is more beyond China that is there in the Indian Ocean region. It's no longer, it's not that, you had US, China, US and India in the Indian Ocean region, to an extent Australia, more Japan to the Quad, and now it's China. Um, I think there is more other players who are coming up in the region and who have been doing quite a lot in the region, through whether it's through tourism, whether it's through political engagements, whether it's diplomatic. It's Saudi Arabia, it's Turkey, it's Russia. You have a number of other countries who have been engaging with the islands of the Indian Ocean region, especially on the African littoral, where there's a lot of, I think there's a lot of presence from a number of countries who wants to engage in the region. So this is fairly new in terms of the presence of other players, and I think most governments, whether it's India, whether it's US or Australia, are more focused or more monitoring China's presence. And perhaps we're not really studying or examining the presence of other players, and what would that presence mean if, or what would interactions between these players in China, or these players like Saudi Arabia, Russia, Turkey, with the islands, with the littorals, mean for the larger traditional players in the region, or the security. So these are kind of the two main trend lines that I see in the Indian Ocean region. And within that, of course, there are many sub regions, sub areas, sub themes under it. But these are the two areas that I see as which would have an effect on the security architecture.
Absolutely. Well done in terms of navigating all that. I already have like 6 or 7 questions I could ask as a follow-up, but I'm going to limit it because you returned, especially in the second trend line, talking about other nations that are more engaged in the IOR that people are not paying as much attention to, in relation to the island states. This is one of those things that has become a buzzword among communities that focus on the Indian Ocean region, the IOR island states. Here in Washington, the bias is that IOR island states are important purely and primarily because of geopolitics. Those of us who dive a little deeper scream as loud as we can that that's not the case, that the IOR island states have a lot of different things, that they're sort of the focal points for seeing these developments occur. Can you get into why the IOR island states have become more prominent geopolitically? Is it just because China's shown up on the scene, or are there other things? And what is the disjoint between what the IOR island states are looking for their own domestic reasons politically, and then what the non-regional or non-neighbor actors are trying to work in terms of cooperation?
Sure. So when I study this aspect, for me, what is very clear is that most governments still look at the Indian Ocean islands through how they engage with them through the Cold War, like 70s and 80s, because after that, after the 90s, there was not, the Indian Ocean was fairly quiet, unlike the Pacific. There wasn't much happening, so it was kind of calm. There wasn't much competition. You had India take on a big role, and America was there within the larger security framework. But the islands at that point were also newly independent sovereign states, so there wasn't that much that they were doing or engaging, or say, they were still figuring it out. There was a lot of domestic issues that internally they had to focus on after gaining independence of years and years of colonial rule. So the challenges of that time were different than the challenges that there are today, right? The island nations, yes, their geography is absolutely critical. The geography matters. They are critical for geopolitics. From a naval campaign warfare point of view, the geography is absolutely critical. But they also carry a lot of agency today. They are members of the United Nations, right? So let me put it in a way that might be easier to perhaps understand for government or others in the US. The whole concept of rules-based order, right? That the rules-based order, the respect of law, traditions, customary law, regional institutions, UN is extremely important. So you talk more about the bigger powers and how the bigger democracies must come together to preserve this security, which is shared values and uphold through the freedom of kind of democracy and rules and laws, right? Look the difference Mauritius has made on this whole conversation through Diego Garcia. I mean, it is a small island. It was able to, I mean, it took the whole issue of Diego Garcia to UN. You had a moment where there were all of 5 countries that supported US and UK at the international resolution. Some of your closest partners did not vote for the United States and United Kingdom, right? There's a lot of agency that they carry at the United Nations. And if the conversation, if the idea, or if you're going to have the narrative that a rules-based order is important, it is important to respect what is being said. So I think you would also have to engage with the islands accordingly. So now with the Diego Garcia issue, you have this conversation on the ground, which basically says, okay, United Kingdom has basically said that, it's out of UN's purview. UN does not have the right to give a judgment on that, and it's non-binding. And Washington has said, well, it's not my problem. It's in London's issue. London has an issue with it, and they are our biggest transatlantic kind of ally. So the conversation on the ground has essentially become, which has actually been advocated or led by the Chinese, is that, well, look, if China does it, then it's a big deal, and the whole world comes together to condemn China. But when the West does it, it's kind of accepted. So the conversation amongst the islands themselves is saying, okay, so you can break the rules. It's about who breaks it. So it's creating a very negative narrative on the ground, actually. And I think the reason this probably on the ground perspective is not reaching Washington or Delhi or others, well, India supports Mauritius on this, is because perhaps we don't understand on the ground the importance of these islands and what is happening on the ground. We've looked at them from afar. You put them on the map and you scale the map to size, they almost disappear. You have to zoom in to look at it. So we have a tendency to look at kind of the size to their, how much weight they carry, right? But in a system that you are trying to uphold, in a system which is UN matters, where laws matters, where democracy matters, where respect matters, they carry a lot of agents. It's one vote each at the United Nations.
It's well said, and I do not disagree with a single thing you said. That and especially with Mauritius's offer to the United States of a 99-year lease for Diego
Absolutely.
Garcia. I mean, there's definitely mitigating circumstances that there are others. Nalanti at CNA has been pushing, like there has to be a decision point at some point. I don't disagree with this, but related also, I mean, to the issue of Mauritius and Seychelles and Madagascar, the Maldives, Sri Lanka, especially these island states. Because their economies are so dependent upon the sea, they are particularly concerned about criminal activity that occurs on the oceans, whether it be illicit networks, whether it be dumping, whether it be IUU fishing. And can you get into why this is so critical? Because yes, you can show the numbers, and it is immense. The economic cost on these island states that are losing income and revenue because of illegality in the waterways. Why has there not been a breakthrough? I guess is my question. All of these states recognize that they share a common series of challenges. There are major regional actors that also agree and concur with it. Why hasn't there been greater cooperative steam put behind addressing maritime crime and maritime illegality?
I think the story is a little different in the Indian Ocean than the Pacific, because Indian Ocean was this quiet zone, there was not much competition, and maritime security was not at front and center for the countries in the rim in their foreign policy engagements. Whereas in the Pacific, like South Pacific, right, they have been working collaboratively and through the Pacific Island Forum on issues, on these very issues, right, on whether it's crime, illegal fishing. US works with them, the Pacific Quad, they essentially work on these issues, which is US, France, Australia, and New Zealand. They work together on humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, on capacity building, on illegal fishing, and these are the issues which are at the heart and at the core of these island nations, as you just pointed out. The problem in the Indian Ocean is there is no one forum in the Indian Ocean region that brings together all the islands to kind of voice their concerns, right? You have the Indian Ocean Commission, which is the French-speaking islands of Southwest Indian Ocean, Mauritius, Seychelles, Madagascar, Comoros, and Reunion through France. Or you have the Indian Ocean Rim Association, which has members from Iran to Indonesia and South Africa and Australia, within which everybody's political concerns are different, you know, the social fabric is different, so you don't have much space for the islands to voice their security challenges. So the conversation in Indian Ocean has been different, and I think that's why there hasn't been a breakthrough, because maritime security hasn't been at the forefront of bigger powers engaging in the region. And these are looked at softer issues and non-traditional security issues, and you make a call and how much investments should you make in that, or how important it is. But you asked me, sorry, I didn't answer this in the last one, which is to say, what is it that they are looking at, and how, what is the gap between their perception of security challenges and what the traditional security act players are doing. And I think this is exactly the perception. When you go to one of the islands and ask them what are the top 5 security challenges that they face, and the top 5 challenges would be climate change, illegal fishing, maritime crime like drugs and human trafficking, and in kind of on disaster, right? Disaster is another issue. First of all, there's small islands with very big exclusive economic zones. That means the area that they have to monitor for their own safety and kind of interest is bigger than they are able to manage, whether it's from human capital, whether it's from financial point of view, whether it's capacity or resources. Second of all, they don't have, there's a lot of issue in terms of monitoring such vast waters. So now you have radars, you have information fusion centers that has come up. Delhi's put that up in 2017, which provides a coherent way of at least monitoring, which is very new, right? So the ability to even understand what was going on was very low because the investments were low. So the countries took a lot of hit in actually losing resources and losing economy through these illegal activities. Now, because of geopolitical competition, you have attention back into the Indian Ocean region, and you're trying to look at what are the areas for collaborations, what are the areas challenges, what the region needs. And I think that's where you're coming up with these non-traditional security issues that require. And I think most countries feel that, okay, when we talk about geopolitical competition, it must be absolutely big ships and kind of more of a naval side of things, you know, much more hard security based, but actually there's a lot of these smaller non-traditional softer security issues that we talk about. There's also an overlap today in terms of strategic implications that traditional security issues and non-traditional security issues carry. For instance, using fishing fleet or scientific research vessels for information and intelligence collection, right? These have consequences or implications for your deployment patterns or anti-submarine warfare and all sorts of things. So I don't think so you can really draw a strict line saying, okay, now this is just non-traditional security issues, so it's a completely different set of problems and challenges, and these are traditional. There's a little bit of an overlap now, and I think that would have to be navigated. And it's exactly the focus from the geopolitical competition that the islands are utilizing to draw attention to issues that matter to them, which is climate change, which is you know, disaster management, illegal fishing, and a blue economy. These are some of the main issues for these island nations.
Keeping the theme, but changing the geographic focus. My center, the NESA Center, kind of the core geographic area that we have historically looked at is the Middle East, the broader Middle East. And obviously this is a place the United States has a heavy footprint, especially in the security realm. Between the U.S. military presence, U.S. security cooperation, it's ever present and diversified throughout the region. And then obviously CENTCOM has been active in actual combat situations for upwards of 20 years now as part of the various campaigns in Afghanistan and Iraq and elsewhere. But the Middle East, especially the Arabian Peninsula, is a component. Granted, it is the northwest component of the Indian Ocean region, but there is no identification, at least no widespread identification, of this region being part of this larger Indian Ocean construct. Um, I find this particularly frustrating, just for expressing my own personal views, because of how reliant on maritime trade all of these nation states are, whether it be Qatar or the UAE or Saudi Arabia, Oman, and then not even bringing up the conundrum that is Yemen currently. Um, what is the what is a in your ways, how would you approach that challenge of building a identification in the Arabian Peninsula towards the Indian Ocean region? Is this just something that they're just a region that is a little bit slower than the others in developing this maritime identity, or do you think there's something about the dynamics of the Middle East itself that keeps that identity from emerging in political conversations?
I think it's the nature of conflicts in the region, right? Like for instance, for the longest time, India has always had one of the longest coastlines, maritime coastlines, right? But it has its immediate threats and its kind of threats and challenges have always primarily been continental. So the conversation, the political conversation, whether it's the defense budget, whether it is in terms of even the India-China conversation, for the longest time, it was primarily through the border, from the border that we share on the continental side of it, right? So I think it is something similar with the Middle East, that the nature of the conflict at land, the nature of the conflict within the territories, amongst the territories different, which goes from, I think, the Arabian Sea to the Persian Gulf, is so much dominated with issues emanating from land that the maritime side of it perhaps slides out of it because it does not have as much hostilities or disruptions as it does on land. I mean, I was surprised with the kind of conversations I was seeing during the whole Suez Canal, kind of the ship and that was lodged there, and the kind of some of the basic things, right, about the region. People were really surprised to find, oh, this much trade, or these are the countries bordering it, or even what happens. You don't hear about it because the moment you think Middle East is you completely go to like combat, like land and continental uh, conflicts and struggles, right? So that area kind of goes, I think, right under the radar. But the fact that the maritime security around that region is extremely important, not just for the Indian Ocean rim, but for countries outside of it. Because whether the larger Central Indian Ocean region might be a transit route, a highway, but that is the starting point. That is kind of a destination as well as a starting point for a lot of the ships and a lot of trade that's going through it. So I think we will probably see more of it as the maritime conversation goes forward. It will take some time to reshape our mental maps to include the Middle East, the Persian Gulf, and the Arabian Sea when we talk about the Indian Ocean region, and to look at it from a maritime point of view. This is not to discount everything that's going on the continental side of it, what's happening in the Middle East, or what will perhaps continue to happen there. But I think there is a need to kind of understand what is happening on the maritime side of it, how they are also interacting with each other, because whether the United States looks at it or not, whether US looks at it or not, China is, Saudi Arabia is, Turkey is, Russia is, other players are. So I think it's a matter of time. And the problem for most of the countries, including India, is that a lot of the engagements are reactionary. You scramble and you put together a policy when you see something is happening from, say, a country that you consider to be a competition or a threat. But until that happens, you're not really looking at the region. So I think there's a need to first maybe look at the region and define for your own strategic and national interest part of it, point of view, point, what is important, what are the geographic definitions and the lines, and what needs to be done, and then respond as threats emerges. But then to scramble together a kind of a policy because somebody is there, it'll always be one step behind, because you're just reacting to someone else's um, activities. So unless you have your own kind of end goal, it's going to be harder to keep up in the Indian Ocean region.
Thank you for saying that, because that's far better than I could ever put it. In fact, I may steal some of those quotes with your permission. we brought up the United States, and I've kept you. I could keep you for another 2 or 3 hours, honestly, but to allow you to start your day, let's go to a question that you brought up the U.S. Obviously, NESA is a U.S. government affiliated institution. For you, as someone who spends their life and their profession looking at the various complicated overlapping calculuses that exist in the Indian Ocean region, what opportunities, challenges, threats should the United States be thinking about in relationship to the Indian Ocean region? Because right now, the way that administratively the U.S. government is organized, and then the strategic kind of recalculation from the global war on terror to kind of, we don't call it great power competition anymore, but whatever it is going to be called. The areas of focus still are Europe and then the Asia Pacific. The Indian Ocean is developing an interest, but what would you recommend if you got 3 minutes with the Secretary of State or Secretary of Defense? You said, Secretary Austin, here are the points I really need you to understand about the Indian Ocean region. What would those points be?
Oh, well, I think I'm going to need a little bit time if I were to be in a room with Secretary Ashton to talk about it. But I think a broader theme would be, I think mostly US says that, we want to be in the Indian Ocean region in a supportive role, help countries like India take on a better role and do more in the region. Absolutely, that's fine. And it's not to say that the Pacific is not important, but to be able to figure out what you need to do in the region, you first need to understand the region. And you're not going to understand the region unless you engage with the region as a whole and not divide it up into 5 to 6 different zones and work with it in silos, because that's not when you're getting the whole picture. And that is the biggest problem, I think, coming out of both state and DOD, the nature of engagement of the Indian Ocean region. The desks that look at the Indian Ocean region are all continental desks. There is no one place in state or in DOD that monitors or looks at the region as a whole, right? If it's from the military point of view, it's the 3 combatant commands, and each zone has different priorities and different challenges to deal with. So you're not really getting down to what is happening on the region, on the ground. Second is, even if you want to help other countries take on a bigger role, like players like India, which is more than happy to do it, it's still going to require American presence in the region. Well, let me put it this way: you want a country with 14% of the defense budget that goes to the Navy to monitor and take control of the entire Indian Ocean, go from eastern coast of Africa to the western coast of Malacca to the southern Indian Ocean and the Arabian and Persian Gulf. If it's difficult for the United States Navy, now let's put that into perspective for the Indian Navy. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's definitely challenging. So America has to figure out, even if you want to help India, how best to offer that, what is available. And for that, to be able to do that, you have to understand the challenges and the challenges in the region, and as well as the opportunities in the region. You have to engage with the region bilaterally, not through India, and have that conversation with India then bilaterally, right? So American engagement has to be in 2 phases. One should be in 2 phases. One is with its key partners in the region, like India, Australia, France, and others who are there. And second, to have bilateral conversations with the countries, the littorals and the smaller nations. So, they are still sovereign nations. They hold a lot of agency. So US should engage with them as sovereign nations, understand, have more conversation with it, understand that perspective, and bring that up in their conversations with friends and partners. I don't think so. The whole approach should be that, okay, we're going to do this from a distance. We'll just work in the region through France, India, and Australia. Absolutely, there's a concept of burden sharing, and that is the way to go toward it. But there's also some challenges. France has deep colonial history in the region. Some of the countries don't look kindly to France, and similarly with India. Some of the countries don't. We've seen recent developments that was extremely anti-India, right? In both Sri Lanka and Maldives. Of course, things are getting better, and India and France and UK and Australia are not going to disappear from the region, because because Indian Ocean is more of especially for India and France, is more of a priority theater than it is for the United States. But even if United States wants to work through the burden sharing model, which is the right model, it still has to understand the region before it can chart out what is it that it can provide. And I think for that, to begin with, the US has to look at the Indian Ocean and engage with the Indian Ocean as one region. My last War on the Rocks piece had suggested an Indian Ocean deployment to be able to kind of, engage with the region, and also leveraging beyond the Navy, the Coast Guard, and the US Marine Corps in different ways of it. And I think I would still say that would be one way to kind of understand the region that would help also in US work better with its partners.
So I'm going to, without your permission, use what you just said as advocacy for the NESA activities throughout the Indian Ocean region, because we are the one DoD entity that actually does cross the seam. So we will use that as affirmation of our structural model. And of course, we will echo support for Carnegie, of course, and your project there. But I think that's incredibly well said, because one of the things that I've noticed, just to get on my soapbox for a second, is that in security cooperation, historically for the U.S., it has been grocery lists. States have come like, we want 10 fast attack craft, or we need radar installation stations, or whatever. And then these things are provided, and they don't have the capabilities with their current government structure or personnel to support them. Increasingly, the shopping list is going away and is being replaced by calls for U.S. networking and kind of professional educational training. So it is, listen, help us set up a national defense college. Help us deepen our non-commissioned officer trainings programs. Help us maximize the capabilities we have versus trying to expand our capacity beyond what our economy or our government structure or our logistical supply chain can support. So I think that is also something that the United States needs to learn quick when it comes to the Indian Ocean region, that the responses from regional states are incredibly nuanced and very, very self-aware. And I think that's something that is that's worthy of greater attention from the United States, because those are not deep asks. To the United States or France, whoever it is, if they need help with professional military education, that is a far cry from helping us develop a Coast Guard from top to bottom. And so there is definitely a lot of wisdom in a lot of these responses. But that is a topic for a separate question, separate conversation, which, as you can imagine, we will have you back to talk as part of this series and other NESA programs. But thank you so much for carving out time, especially amidst a very, very crazy time. I can't tell you how informative this is. A lot of things you said were said with such precision that I am going to unapologetically steal them from you. I'll attribute them, of course, to you, but I will use your phrasing. So. But thank you, Darshana, just for carving out the time. I greatly appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Thank you. This was great.